Shane here with Seasons Change. Today I'm going to do an arrow build along of how exactly I built this 28% EFOC hunting arrow. It flies like a dream and penetrates like crazy, shooting it out of my Robertson Fatal Stick here. So if you'd like to see how I built this sucker, stay tuned. All right, let's take a look at the front end componentry of this arrow, and it'll give you a better idea of what the front end's going to weigh and what total arrow weight's going to be and how I get the FOC. So I'm going to be shooting two different broadheads this year. This one is a 185 grain Grizzly with a 75 grain adapter. And I know what you're thinking, that puts me at around 260 something. But when I ordered these, they're advertised at 185. They actually came in at around 177. So plus that 75 grain adapter puts them just over 250 grains. And then once you sharpen them, really close to 250 grains. The other broadhead that I'm shooting is a 190 grain meathead with a 75 grain adapter, and that puts them at 265 grains. So just over 250, just over 260. I don't think it'll make that big of a difference from what I've seen in arrow flight. Also, I'm going to be screwing them into these 100 grain brass adapters here from Gold Tip. And then this is a 2117 aluminum arrow that I'm using as my external footer for that structural integrity. That is huge, and that weighs in at about 25 grains. So let's just call it an even 250 for the broadhead. 100 grains, that's 350 grains up front, and then plus this 25 grain aluminum outsert system or footer. That's going to put me at about 375 grains up front. If I'm using this broadhead, add 10 to 15. So we're talking 375, so 385, 390 range with that meathead. And that's all going to be carried by this Gold Tip Entrada, the ultralight Entrada, in 340 spine. So, all right guys, before I dive into the specifics, I just want to give you a look at what the total arrow comes out to be, what the total arrow weight comes out to be. This arrow's got the 265 grain meathead on the front, and it's 28.2% FOC. So let's take a look at what that total arrow weight is. Grab my scale here. Letting this baby turn on. All right, so with that 265 grain meathead, 100 grain adapter, and the 25 grain aluminum footer on the end, this arrow comes out to 671.8 grains, okay? With the Grizzly, that's about 250 grains mounted on that 75 grain adapter. So it's about 350 total grains up front. Let's take a look at what that total arrow weight is going to be. And that's 654 grains. So about 15 grain difference, which makes sense because that should be the difference in the broadhead weight. And this one comes out to about 27 point something percent FOC, so extremely closely related to this 265. And I think as long as I'm shooting at anything inside 30 yards, I'm not really going to notice a difference in trajectory, okay? So now that we've got kind of the componentry out of the way, hope you guys enjoy the rest of the video. I'll get into how I built this aluminum footer, which is structural integrity, Ashby's factor #1, and then I'll show some of me fletching and tuning these arrows. So I kind of loosely follow Ashby's 12 factors, not real strict, but I just thought since I was building the arrows, I'd film the process, take you guys along. Hope you enjoy.
Now, our first factor, and probably the most important, it probably holds overall all the time, and actually should be a given on your arrow, just like broadhead sharpness is the structural integrity of the arrow. And it applies to everything, from your nock all the way to the tip. It is truly a must-have arrow feature, because without it, none of the other factors are going to matter. If you damage that arrow, if it breaks on impact, it is not going to matter how perfect the flight was or how sharp the broadhead was or what kind of broadhead, how many blades it had. Nothing else matters when there's a structural failure in the arrow.
So what you see me doing here is building that aluminum footer that's going to really beef up the front end of my arrow. Ashby was just talking about his factor number 1, which is structural integrity. And you see me building this aluminum footer to help me give that front end of the arrow maximum impact structural integrity. So I just beveled the front end and the back end to be able to slide into things easier, and then also be able to pull them out easier. And what you see me doing right now is actually widening out the throat of that aluminum footer so that it'll slide up over the brass adapter. One thing you'll notice with the 2117 arrows and then those gold tip entradas that I'm using is that the 2117 will slide over the arrow perfectly fine, but then the brass adapter has trouble, or it has trouble sliding up over that brass adapter. So now I'm going to check that throat that I just widened out, and sure enough, the brass adapter fits in there fine. So now I can go ahead and put it on the arrow and test that out. In this next step, you see me sanding down the front of the arrow, and all I'm doing is creating a surface to which the JB weld that I'm going to use later can adhere to that aluminum footer that I put on and just make it a super strong bond. After you've done any kind of sanding or roughing up to the outside of the arrow, I would always recommend using acetone or nail polish remover to clean that thing off, and you can see how much dirt I removed once I was able to clean that thing off. Also recommend doing it to the back end if you're going to be using any kind of wrap. After you've cut your arrow, or even if you've bought an arrow that's previously cut, would always recommend squaring it off. This is a G5 arrow squaring device that I like to use, and just checking there to make sure both ends are completely square. This step is unnecessary, but I like to remove the label on the arrow. I just think it gives it a cleaner look. It just makes the overall product look more finished and cooler. So once I've removed the label on the arrow, I'm going to go ahead and cut off a section of arrow wrap. Now, any kind of weight you add to the back end of the arrow takes away from your forward of center percentage. However, if you've bow hunted for any length of time, you know that you spend a decent amount of time looking for your arrows, whether you're stump shooting, target shooting, or out there and you shoot an animal. So being able to find your arrow to me is critical, and seeing it in flight. So I'm using some yellow wraps here, and I'm shooting 3-inch feathers, so I measured these to be just a little bit longer than 3 inches so that I can just cover the back end of the arrow, which is what I'm going to see while it's in flight or on the ground. So here I'm just measuring, cutting those, and then wrapping my shaft with that wrap.
I think that is by far the Fletching choice if you're shooting EFOC, ultra EFOC arrows. They look really funny until you get used to them. And people will give you a strange look because it looks like tiny little fins on the back of a rocket. You can see it in comparison to the Grizzly Broadhead here. It's very, very short fletching. This is mine. I use 4 fletching. I do most of my hunting, always have by stalking. And I don't look down at my arrow and put it on the string. I don't have to worry about which way it's turned with 4 fletch. You can use 3 fletch, you can use 4 fletch. It really doesn't matter. Whatever you're used to using. There is nobody that makes this fletching pattern. You can't go out and buy a cut feather. And I'm not aware of anyone that makes a feathered cutter that cuts this pattern. Fortunately, it's dead simple. All you need is a good pair of scissors. And you can cut it from a full-length feather, or you can cut it from a long die-cast feather. The basic features is this back vertical cut, absolutely straight up and down. It is 1/2 inch high, regardless of the length of the fletching you end up with. This always stays at 1/2 inch high. The fletching is put on as a straight fletch. There is no offset, there is no helical. Now, we discussed earlier that this back straight edge is very quiet in flight because it creates less turbulence behind it than any other trailing pattern on the feather.
All right, guys, there you have it. There's the fletching done, straight cut on the back and then tapered all the way down on a straight edge to the front. You'll notice, though, that I do have a helical on the fletching, and I just prefer a little bit of helical. I think it stabilizes the arrow a little bit. I know I'm sacrificing a little bit of speed, but I don't have the best release, so for me, that's a worthwhile trade-off. All right, so the next step for me is that I'm going to mount my broadhead onto the arrow and that brass insert that goes with it. Obviously, I've already bare shaft tuned these arrows, so I'm just creating another arrow here. So the step you're not seeing is me bare shaft tuning this arrow to get it to where it needs to be. But once you've done that, I would do these same steps. I'd remove that brass insert, screw in a broadhead to it, and then align it like I'm doing here, so that when my arrow's on the string, I have the perfect X in the back. I get better shelf clearance that way. And then my broadhead is horizontal to my vision. So that way the barbs on the broadhead or the sides of the broadhead don't stick up in my vision. And that's how I like to have it. So here you see me doing that. I'll do one more spin test on it to make sure it's perfect. And then after that, I'll go ahead and glue that aluminum footer onto the end with my JB weld, now that I have my broadhead, brass, and arrow shaft lined up perfectly for how I want it. All right, so in this video, I didn't get a chance to show me going through all of Ashby's 12 factors, so I want to talk about each of them briefly here and mention how I either accomplished them or failed to accomplish them. So the number one factor, structural integrity, that I spent the most time on in this video, I think I well accomplished that by having that brass insert that's going to give the inside of the arrow structure, and then the aluminum footer that goes around the outside kind of gives it that double whammy of having the insert inside and then the aluminum footer on the outside that's really going to protect the front end of that arrow. And that's what I'm most concerned about when I'm making impact with heavy bone, or in my case in Southern California, rocks when I'm shooting at ground squirrels. The other factor of structural integrity is just having strong components. And I think with the Grizzly and with the Meathead, I have accomplished having that. All right, number two is arrow flight, and specifically perfect arrow flight. So I don't show it in this video. I'll show some clips of my arrows flying well at the end of this video. But what I did was I bare shafted these arrows out to 60 yards. And I don't have the perfect release, but I have a clean enough and consistent enough to release to where I was able to consistently get my bare shafts to hit with my fletch shafts out to 60 yards, which is impressive and speaks a lot to how well the bow and the arrows are tuned. I also, after I fletched these arrows, I took them through a paper tuning rig, and some people don't like using a paper tuner, but I think whenever you throw fletching on the back of the arrow, you should tune your arrow with the fletches on, and I like to adjust where my nock is, I guess like rotating my nock to get the best feather clearance off the shelf. So after I bare shaft tuned them, I made minor adjustments after fletching and shot them through paper to get bullet holes through paper. I also shot some bare shafts through paper from like 3 feet away from the bow and was able to get near perfect bullet holes with that. So I was super happy with my tune and my arrow flight, which is Ashby's number 2 factor. Number 3 factor is the forward of center. So Ashby breaks down forward of center into several categories. and he defines EFOC, or extreme FOC arrows, as between 19 and 30% forward of center. And then ultra EFOC he defines as above 30% forward of center weight. So my arrows fall at the higher end of the EFOC category, falling in around 27 to 28%. And if you know anything about Dr. Ashby, you probably know about forward to center. And this is a factor that I think I was able to achieve pretty well here with my build. The fourth factor is broadhead mechanical advantage. And I accomplished that by using 3-to-1 ratio broadheads, or close to 3-to-1. I know the grizzly isn't a true 3-to-1. I think the meathead comes closer to that. And according to Dr. Ashby, just like the ramp leading up to a building, let's say you're pushing a wheelchair up a ramp, you want that ramp to be long and at a low angle so that it's easier to push that wheelchair up the ramp in through the door. Whereas if you have a steep, abrupt ramp, it's going to be much harder to push a wheelchair up that. And similar to that, that's just like a broadhead entering the tissue of an animal. Long, slender, low angle gives you that nice, easy force to push in through the animal, whereas the wider angle, I guess, is much harder to push through. So the grizzly and the meathead, I think I accomplished that good broadhead mechanical advantage. Number 5 factor is the shaft diameter to ferrule diameter ratio. And one of the main reasons I switched, I used to be using gold tip traditional classic 340s, and they have a really wide outside diameter. And when I put the footer on the outside of those arrows, the broadhead to shaft diameter was not advantageous. The shaft wasn't larger, but it certainly wasn't any smaller. So shifting to these gold tip entradas have a much smaller outside diameter, and they're smaller than the ferrule on either the grizzly or the meathead, especially the meathead. The meathead ferrule really overlaps on that aluminum footer and gives it a major advantage stepping down from the broadhead to the shaft. All right, number 6 factor is the arrow mass. And when Dr. Ashby talks about the arrow mass, he talks about having the heaviest arrow that you are comfortable with the trajectory. And he shoots significantly heavier arrows than this. But I really like the trajectory that I get in that 650 to 670 range. So both my arrows come in at a good spot for me. So one with the grizzly is 654 grains, and then the other one is 672 grains. So I've achieved good arrow mass, and I have a great trajectory out of my bow. Factor 7 is the broadhead edge finish. This is something that I did not show. I'm a nut about sharpening. I love sharpening knives, broadheads, all kinds of things. And these single bevels are no exception for me. So I first started with a file, moved to a knife steel, and then I stropped these on leather with stropping compound until they were near mirror finish. So super happy with the way they turned out. They're slicing right through paper extremely easily, and then just popping hair everywhere. They're just popping hair off arms and my legs super easy, as evidenced by the fact that I have no more hair on my arm than my legs. Okay, number 8 is the shaft profile. So I think this is the only area that I kind of fail on Ashby's 12 factors. Is Ashby talks about having a tapered shaft being more advantageous to penetration, because as that shaft passes through bone or through the animal's cavity, if there is less mass or width on the end of the arrow, it's easier for that arrow to slip through the animal. For me, these are parallel shafts, and so I fail in this category. However, this is a DIY and somewhat of a cheap build, and I think that's one thing I'm willing to sacrifice on, is the fact that these are just parallel shafts. All right, number 9 is the broadhead and arrow silhouette. So Dr. Ashby talked about wanting the broadhead and arrow silhouette to be sleek. And I think, once again, going back to the mechanical advantage, these broadheads and arrows have a nice taper. One of the reasons that I put that taper on the front of the aluminum footer and the back of the aluminum footer, well, I guess mainly the front, is that I want that to slip into the animal well and not have any abrupt things that it can catch on and create friction as it's going through the animal. 10th factor is the type of edge bevel. So Dr. Ashby preaches hard about the single bevel broadheads for bone breaching capabilities. So I've chosen to go with these. I shot 2 animals last year with the grizzly. Didn't happen to breach any bones, but they performed really well. In the past, I've shot a couple deer. Some of them I've had negative experiences with when I hit their scapula with a 3-blade broadhead. One time I hit a deer with a 3-blade and it went right through the scapula, but it was kind of the thin part of the scapula, exited the other side. And then on another one, I hit it, I think, lower in the scapula where it's thicker. Arrow did not penetrate as much as I needed it to, and the animal was not recovered. So one of the things I'm looking for with these single bevels is I'm hoping that it's going to turn a hit like that I just had into a kill. So for both the broadheads I'm using this year, it's going to be the grizzly and the meathead. I have accomplished that. All right, tip design. Number 11, both the meathead and the grizzly have the Tonto tip. Ashby talks about this having the lowest possibility of skip. So when that broadhead hits bone inside the animal, it's, instead of skipping off that, it's going to be able to dig in and then begin that rotation that single bevels are so notorious for. 12th factor is the heavy bone threshold, and this is one that a lot of people get hung up on, but Ashby talks about the percentage chance of an arrow getting through bone increases exponentially once you get to 650 grains, and then continues to increase that percentage chance as you go up in weight from 650 grains. So my arrows aren't sailing above this hurdle, but they're coming in at 654 and around 670. So I at least meet that requirement. So of all 12 factors, I think number 8, the shaft profile, which is I'm shooting parallel shafts instead of tapered shafts, is the only one that I really fail at in this category. Other than that, all of the factors I think I have met, and I'm really looking forward to putting these to use on some game this year. All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed that arrow build along. At the end here, I just put a couple clips of the arrows flight. They're flying really well, despite my poor form and poor release. But hope you guys enjoyed that. I really look forward to putting these arrows to use this year. And please comment, like, and subscribe if you got a better way to do things. I always love to hear about it. If not, I'll see you guys in the next video. Appreciate your continued support.